the real villain in this movie, Miranda or Nate? Hello everyone, I'm Sarah from Everyday Starlet. Welcome to my channel. I make videos to inspire you to be the star of your own life. I'm continuing my masculine feminine energies film breakdown series with The Devil Wears Prada. I don't wear Prada, but maybe the devil does. I don't know. If you're not familiar with what I mean by masculine and feminine energies, I talk about this in most of my videos, but a brief summary. Masculine and feminine energies are energies that live within all of us. We all contain both energies. We all have a core energy. That's the one we're most ourselves in. That energy often links up with our gender. It doesn't have to, but it very often does. And we can be in wounded or healed versions of either of these energies. And each of these energies contains archetypes. We all contain all of the archetypes, and we can tap into them whenever we want. I have a ton of videos about the masculine and the feminine archetypes. In order to have sexual polarity in a relationship, you need one partner to be in the masculine and one partner to be in the feminine. These opposite energies attract sexually and same energies repel sexually. So let's get into The Devil Wears Prada. I find it very interesting that this film was actually not requested, but I really wanted to do this breakdown because so many people online have all of this back and forth about whether or not Miranda's the bad guy, or whether or not Nate's the bad guy, or was Nate a good boyfriend, or was Nate not a good boyfriend. I feel like this movie has so much drama around it when it comes to relationships that I really wanted to break it down from a masculine feminine perspective. So first I want to talk about the overall energies in this movie, and then I'm going to get into the relationship dynamics. The interesting thing about The Devil Wears Prada, and I've seen this movie dozens of times, so I rewatched this movie to do this breakdown, and since studying so much about the masculine and the feminine and understanding these energies, I see this movie so differently now. I mean, I still enjoy the movie, but wow, this movie, for being such a chick flick, rom-com, woman's movie, the women in this movie are so masculine. Oh my god. This whole world that they've created around this movie, I mean, particularly for a movie that is about the fashion industry, which is something that is really about beauty and aesthetics and is very feminine. It's such a masculine energy movie. It's unbelievable. I mean, watching it now, like, I was getting anxiety from the lives that these women were leading, and like, it's a fictional story, right? But you know that there are so many women out there who are living the lives that these women are living. And it's become so commonplace nowadays. You see it even in the opening montage, okay? You have all of these women that are all getting ready to go off to their jobs in New York City. And it's interesting how they're all putting on their like feminine image, so to speak. Like, they've got their lingerie and their jewelry and these accessories, their outfits. They're putting together this very feminine aesthetic, but they're very much in their masculine energy while they're doing it. They are, I mean, like, meticulously measuring out their breakfast, which I'm gonna get into that in a second. They're living for their passion and purpose. And so many of them are like kissing their boyfriends goodbye while their boyfriends are still in bed. And I know, like in Andy's case, we know about Nate and that he works nights, so he's not just some unemployed guy. But the fact that these other women are kissing these guys, and you know, these women are going off to work and these guys are like staying in bed, it's like, do these guys even have jobs? Like, well, it's it just, I don't know. And they're going out, they're trying to catch cabs, they're in this high-powered world and this high-stress environment. And if you're a woman and your goal in life is to be a boss babe, to embrace hustle culture, to achieve big goals, to be CEO of something, like if you're a woman and that's your dream, like that's your goal in life, like it's truly what you want your life to be, I honor that. I absolutely do. I don't say any of this stuff to tell people that they should be living a different life than what they truly want. What I'm saying is, if you are a woman who sees this life, or maybe has been in this life, or is still in this life, and you're like, I'm not happy, please understand that as women, as feminine beings, we are not designed for this hustle culture. We're not designed to be these boss babes running all the time on empty, on no food, which I'm gonna get to. This high stress, on all the time lifestyle. We're not designed for that. The masculine is designed for that. It's evident in the fact that the masculine has a 24-hour hormone cycle. Men can actually push themselves every day. They can be a part of the grind. I'm not saying that's necessarily what every man wants to do, but that they're much more adaptable to that life. Women are on average on a 28-day hormone cycle, so we shift and change as the months go by. We are not designed to be pushing ourselves, doing the same thing every day. This whole hustle culture life that has been pushed on women, we've been told that this is the goal through movies like this, which again, it's a fun movie. I'm not knocking the movie, but it's another way that we get programmed into, this is the life that women are supposed to want. We make it seem very glamorous when it's actually, this movie and this lifestyle is kind of like the military in stilettos. I mean, this is just this constant like fight or flight. You just never know when you're going to be asked to do something, or it's this constant anxiety and stress. These women are living on caffeine because that's the only thing keeping them going. I get exhausted just watching it. I really do. And so again, if you're a woman and you want to live that life, you want to live that hustle culture, and that's your thing, and that's your dream, and that's what you really truly want to do, I honor that. If you're a woman and you think of that life, maybe you're in that life or anything, and you're like, I'm not happy with this, I don't want to do it, please know that that is natural and normal. Okay, that is actually much more common than I think many of us want to admit. And I don't think enough women actually step up and say, hey, I don't want to be a boss babe. I don't want to hustle all the time. I don't want to be a high achieving woman. I want to be a feminine woman. I want to do feminine things. I want to be in flow, and I want to be able to relax, and I want to be able to surrender, to be in pleasure. And not enough women actually step up and say, that's the life I want. And I think a lot of it has to do with a lot of women not feeling worthy of that. And many of us are programmed that we have to want this high achieving life, and we feel like wrong when we don't want it. It's normal for you to not want it. If you do want it, great, own it, no problem. But if you don't want it, please know that you're not really designed to want it. Like, that's not how most women were designed to be. So you choose your path, but if the path that you're being told is the one you have to be on, or you're being pressured or manipulated through the media and movies like this, or being told that that's how you're supposed to live by people, please know that that's a story that has gotten put on women. That's not our true nature. So these women in this movie, for the most part, are very much in their wounded masculine. And the thing about this hustle culture, boss babe stuff is that, yes, as women, we all have a connection to our masculine. It's healthy for us to be able to use our masculine. However, when our masculine becomes the overriding energy, particularly in somebody who may be naturally feminine, which most women are, we tend to be wounded. And a lot of these women are in a lot of wounding. They're in massive, massive self-deprivation and over-disciplined, over-control, particularly of like what they put in their bodies. There's so many references to eating disorders that I know are supposed to be funny in this movie, but if you're somebody who's ever had disordered eating, which there's probably not many women on the planet that haven't had disordered eating at some point in their life, it's not really funny because it's really close to home. I mean, you know, this meticulously measuring almonds for your breakfast because that's all you eat, or like the joke about, well, I just don't eat until I'm about to pass out and then I have a cube of cheese. Like, I'm one stomach flu away from my goal weight. Like, that obsession with constantly needing to have that perfection. And I have a video about wounded feminine energy and addictions where I go into a little bit about eating disorders. I'm actually going to do a whole video about feminine energy and body image and get a little bit more into eating disorders and things like that in another video. So I'm not going to dig into that too much here. However, that obsessive need to control everything, to try to reach this sort of unattainable perfection, so to speak, that's very masculine. It's very wounded masculine. The Mean Girls culture, Emily and whoever Giselle was playing, I don't know what her name was in the movie, are always kind of being very, very catty to each other. There's always this competition. The feminine is not designed to be competitive. We're not. Most women are very competitive with each other, but that's our masculine. And that's because in our society, we push women into their masculine to be competitive. The feminine is actually about community and connection. We're supposed to see other women as our sisters, as a sisterhood. We're not supposed to see other women as competition that we have to compete for. That's something that gets put on us in our society, and it's so common that it's almost unusual when that doesn't happen, which is really sad, because that's another way that the feminine is designed to be in connection. I mean, we were designed to, you know, give birth in communities. We were designed to bleed together with our menstrual cycles. We were designed to do things together, to connect to the moon. We were designed for all of these things, to have a sisterhood, to have a community and connection. But this whole world of pitting women against each other really has diminished that power, because let's face it, women are really powerful, and we're even more powerful when we're together in a community. So it would make sense that, I'm not putting this all on men, but it would make sense that the powers that be, I'm not saying are all men, right? Because I don't think all men are responsible for trying to manipulate women. However, the powers that be that want to see women not as powerful are probably going to do whatever they can to diminish our feminine power, and pitting women against each other and not having us see each other as sisters and more as competitors, definitely a way to do that. So Miranda is really the queen mean girl, really. I mean, she is, oh man, I don't like to use the word queen because she's actually more of a tyrant king. She is the epitome of wounded masculine, like the epitome. She is a massive control freak. She leads with fear. She leads in her best interests. She doesn't really pay attention to other people's interests. She really doesn't take anyone else's feelings into consideration ever with anything. It's interesting how it's alluded to at one point in the movie that if Miranda was a man, she would just be seen as someone who was good at her job. And that is possible maybe in our current society, and it's possible in certain industries. I mean, if she was a drill sergeant, then probably, yeah. However, I don't really think that her level of tyrannical leadership is really the most conducive to most people, especially if she's leading women. Leading women in that sense, I mean, the women that are working for her are in so much fear and anxiety. They're in fight or flight all the time. That's one of the reasons why she probably goes through so many assistants and why she ends up hiring Andy, is because women are not designed for that. They're not designed to be in that fight or flight all the time. Men are designed to be in that fight or flight. They're designed to be in that facing a wild animal and it's kill or be killed, but then there's a lot of downtime and they have to know how to pounce when they need to pounce. If you think about the most masculine careers that we know of, things like police, firefighters, military, things like that, a lot of that involves a lot of downtime, a lot of like sort of calmness and just being on alert. And then when they need to pounce, they need to pounce. Like when they need to take action, they need to take action. And that's very masculine in its mindset. The feminine isn't really designed for that. The feminine is designed to kind of always be flowing from one thing to another. You know, okay, well, let's do something with the kids here. Well, let's have this pot on the stove cooking. Let's talk to a girlfriend and connect with her. Like the feminine is really designed to kind of be in flow all the time and sort of move from one thing to the next very, very effortlessly and just using her intuition, as opposed to this kind of like downtime and then needing to go. That's not really how most women are designed. So when you lead out of fear, which most women are probably going to shut down and not be as effective when they're operating from fear, the feminine operates much better from safety. And if she's in fear, she's not feeling safe. So when you are leading women, a group of women, which primarily this industry has mostly women in it, Miranda leading from her masculine as this tyrannical king is putting these women even more of a stressful, wounded masculine themselves. And you're not actually cultivating, well, you're not cultivating creativity at all. I mean, if you think about it, for the fashion industry, which is about artistry, creativity, even in the meeting that you see with Miranda when people are throwing out ideas, she's like, nope, next, nope, next, nope, like this and that. She's not cultivating an environment of working through things, of talking through things, of trying to brainstorm, of actually encouraging people to come up with ideas from a place of creativity. It's more from a place of fear, and they're almost afraid to discuss with her what her ideas are, and that's not really the way to cultivate leadership. And I would argue in the masculine or the feminine. However, if she was leading a group of men, that style may work a little bit better, but it probably would depend on what the industry was. And look, I'm not saying, I was in a male-dominated field for a long time, so I understand the concept of women not getting the same respect that men get. I understand that. Like, I'm not dismissing that. It's real and it still happens. But I also think we need to be careful we don't get too quick to just assume that somebody is judging a woman simply because she's doing something that you think that people would be okay with a man doing, because some of us wouldn't be okay with a man doing it either, right? So in a certain sense, we jump to that a lot when it's like, well, it's not necessarily just about how is this woman leading and how is this man leading and which one is okay and which one isn't. It's also a matter of, what are they leading people to do? Who are they leading? And knowing, I mean, a big part of leadership, in whether you're a man or a woman, whether you're leading from your masculine or you're leading from your feminine, a big part of that is knowing the people that you're leading and knowing the best way to lead them to get the effective results. So then this whole video isn't going to be a leadership lesson or ever. I have other videos I think on here talking a little bit more about masculine leadership versus feminine leadership, but in general, I think we jump to that whole, okay, well, if she was a man, it would be okay thing really quickly, as opposed to analyzing the overall situation of, it's not just who she is, what gender she is, and how she's leading. It's also, what are you leading people to do, and who are you leading, and are you leading in the best interests of everybody and leading in a way that is effective for everybody? Because you can have a leadership style, but if the people you're leading are not responding to your leadership style, it's not an effective leadership style. It might be a great leadership style overall, it's just not effective in that moment. So I think that's an important thing to consider when we're talking about leadership skills, but that's not really the point of this video. So the interesting thing about Miranda is you don't get a lot of glimpses into her personal life, so to speak. So it's actually really difficult to tell whether Miranda is actually a feminine character that is operating from a wounded masculine, or she may just be a masculine character and she's using her masculine in a very wounded way. It's hard to know. There's a couple moments that you get a little bit of a glimpse, but they're not really enough to make that decision, because you mostly see Miranda when she's on. You mostly see Miranda when she is in her work mode, and that's when she is very masculine all the time. There's no feminine. There's no feeling, there's no compassion, there's no emotion. It's literally just cold, directional, and bossy, controlling, those kind of things, right? I would even say that, I mean, she has twin daughters, which we don't see much of in the movie, but even in her, we don't actually ever see Miranda with her children. But in any reference to her children, Miranda does still feel, her energy feels more fatherly than motherly. She's more in this protect and provide for her kids, as opposed to loving and nurturing her kids. So and again, when Miranda is married at the beginning of the movie, and you kind of get the impression that the man that she's married to is not the father of her kids, that she's been married several times. But when you are a single mother, you do need to be in whatever energy your kids need you to be in that moment. Sometimes it's masculine, sometimes it's feminine. I mean, that's the nature of being a parent. I mean, you know, fathers sometimes have to be in their feminine or in their masculine, depending on what the kid needs in that moment. None of that's wrong. It's important to be aware, because especially if you are a single parent and you do find yourself having to be in one energy over the other most of the time, if that's not your natural core energy, that's going to be really draining on you. And it's really important for you to make sure that you're taking care of yourself as well as your children. And I don't have kids, so I'm not pretending that this is easy. However, you're going to burn yourself out if you're a feminine being, say, and you're a single mom, and you do need to be in your masculine a lot, because you do need to protect and provide for your kids, absolutely. But if you're naturally a feminine being and you never take any time to connect to your feminine energy, you're gonna get burnt out. There's no way around it. You're going to, because you're gonna be operating so much in your opposite energy that you're not gonna be able to sustain that for, I mean, you can sustain it for a while, but it's eventually you're gonna crack. I think it's really important to, whenever you can, and it's even important for kids. I actually really do believe that it's important for kids. If you are a feminine woman and you're a mom, you may need to be in your masculine a lot of the time, but you're gonna want your kids to know that their mom has a connection to their feminine energy too. You're gonna want, especially if you have daughters, you're gonna want your daughters to see that mom is in her feminine energy sometimes, so your daughters grow up knowing that feminine energy is a good thing, it's a great thing, and that they can tap into that too and set that example. Or if you have sons, you know, that women do tap into their feminine energy, and your sons knowing what that means and learning how to respect that. So, I mean, that's a side note, because Miranda's kids are not a huge part of this movie, but she doesn't ever appear, at least what we see in the movie, is her actually having a motherly instinct with her kids. She has a much more fatherly take on taking care of her children. Also get a very subtle glimpse into her marriage. You see her husband very, very briefly when Andy actually kind of accidentally walks in on Miranda and her husband having an argument. And oh, it's such a small, subtle scene, but it says so much in that scene. You can tell, at least from this dynamic, that it appears like the husband is a very masculine man. He seems like he's a very driven, directional type man. And he is very upset that Miranda has, you know, didn't show up at an event that was important to him, and she's making all these excuses as to why she couldn't be there, and he was embarrassed that she wasn't there, and as if this was a pattern that was going on. And this is a lesson that I think a lot of people don't really want to hear, but this is an important lesson. If you're a woman and you're operating from your masculine all the time, and you want to date a masculine partner, if you both stay in your masculine all the time, you're not going to come together. You're just going to butt heads. It's not going to work. If you are a woman who is naturally feminine at her core, but she's operating from her masculine all the time, being with a man in his feminine is probably not going to work for you, because you're going to feel pressure to be in your masculine all the time, and you're not going to be able to sink into your feminine. If Miranda actually is a masculine woman, she just happens to be in her wounded masculine a lot of the time, but she's actually masculine at her core, then pairing up with a man who may be more connected to his feminine, or he's naturally feminine, would be a much better suit for her. Like, they would be much better suited. Someone who's maybe more of an artist, so to speak, or whatever, who's going to prioritize the relationship so she can prioritize her passion and purpose, and he can be in support of her living her passion and purpose. That could work. However, the fact that she's clearly choosing these high-powered men is an indication to me that a part of her is actually very feminine, and she wants a partner who's going to be able to bring her feminine out in her. Because very often is when we do that, when we are a woman in our masculine and we get really attracted to a man who's also in his masculine, it's because a part of us really wants him to out-masculine us so we can sink into our feminine. It's like we're looking for him to give us permission, which can work. It doesn't always work. It may not work because if you as a woman have a block to your feminine, he's probably not going to be able to bring it out of you no matter how masculine he is. If you can't tap into it at all, or at least not enough, you won't necessarily inspire his masculine to lead. He may shift into his feminine, or he may just leave because he may not feel an attraction for you, because a masculine man is going to be sexually attracted to a feminine partner. And if he doesn't feel you're feminine at all, he's probably not going to be that attracted to you. And that's the part of the problem. If you can tap into some of your feminine, but he's really masculine, he very well can inspire you to sink more into your feminine. You may be able to play in that dynamic, but you have to be willing and open in order to do that. You end up finding out later that Miranda and her husband are splitting. And that's really the only moment that you see Miranda getting vulnerable. And she's vulnerable with Andy because she trusts Andy. She's in her feminine energy. She's fighting it in that moment. She's fighting her feminine energy so much. Like, she's thinking about, okay, we'll call the PR person, and you know, this is going to be a problem, and we got to deal with this problem, and we're going to have to move seats around, and like she's using her work to distract herself from her emotions because she's not comfortable in her emotions. So we still don't know if she's actually feminine at her core, because a masculine core being could still connect to that part of their feminine energy and release emotions in that sense. So it's really hard to know if this is her feminine and her natural feminine core energy that wants to come out and she's fighting it because her inner masculine is not letting her, or if she just happens to be masculine at her core, she's built up some emotions, she's got to release those feminine emotions, and it's her natural masculine energy that is putting her back on purpose. We don't really know, and in reality it doesn't really matter. It's okay for anybody, masculine or feminine at their core, to release emotions in that sense. When you release emotions, you're in your feminine energy. Those emotions that release is feminine energy. It's perfectly acceptable for anybody to release those. It's usually much more difficult for somebody who's masculine at their core, and she is struggling a lot with it, which could either be the fact that she's masculine at her core, or it could just be that she has blocked her feminine so much that she just can't tap into that part of herself. In general, the fact that Miranda really can't seem to keep personal relationships unless they're people that are there out of fear is an indication that she's at least operating primarily from her masculine. I would say very wounded masculine. Now let's get to Andy. Andy, played by Anne Hathaway, in Anne Hathaway's classic, she's the queen of the makeover movies, the queen of the, like, this is the before and then she goes into the after. Like, she's just, nobody does those kind of movies like Anne Hathaway. Andy at the beginning of the movie is interesting because I would actually say she's a very rare example of a woman who's in a very healthy connection to her masculine energy in the beginning. She knows who she is. She knows what she wants. She is confident. She's a go-getter. She's a really determined passion and purpose. And she's very grounded with it. Like, she's very grounded and determined with who she is. She does have a block to her feminine energy, which is interesting because usually when people have a block to their feminine energy, they tend to go into more of a wounded masculine energy, which she seems to, at least in the beginning, to have a pretty healthy connection to her masculine energy overall. She's blocked to her feminine because you can tell she judges it. because she judges it in other people. Now, granted, the women that she's judging in this sense tend to be very much in their masculine, but she's judging their feminine aspects. She's judging their aspects of the women who are more interested in style and fashion and beauty and those kind of things, because Andy thinks those things are superficial and not important. So you can tell that judgment is definitely a block. Like, she's not comfortable being in her feminine energy, so she's in her masculine. Now, she's relying on it in a relatively healthy way for what her goals are. However, the fact that she's blocked to her feminine is usually an indication that there's something off there. And in the course of this movie, Andy really shifts, and I would say she kind of shifts from being in this very grounded masculine place. She gets this job at Runway because she wants to be a journalist, and she wants to be a high-achieving journalist, and this internship is really just a stepping stone for her. It's something that she doesn't really want to do. She just needs a job, and she needs something that's going to be a platform for her. And she's up for the challenge, which is very masculine. She wants the challenge. She wants to be challenged by this. She's willing to face the challenge. She's very much in her masculine energy. She gets this job, and I think her masculine cracks to some extent. I think because she is getting totally burnt out. And she's getting burnt out because she's doing something. She doesn't really want this job, right? This is not her life. This world is not her world. And she's getting burnt out really quickly because she's not doing what she's passionate about. So when she's in her masculine and she is, you know, trying to get a story, and she wants to be a journalist, and she has things that she's passionate about, she naturally gravitates towards that masculine structure. Doing this job, her masculine structure is cracking a bit because she's not doing something that she's really truly passionate about. She actually kind of thinks of a lot of this stuff as being very frivolous. She starts to get burnt out, and she really sinks into a very wounded feminine. That's actually somewhat common. I think people tend to, if, say for example in this case, I do really think Andy is a feminine cord being. I really do. Say you have a feminine cord being and she's operating very much from her masculine. Could be healthy, could be not, doesn't really matter, but at the end of the day, she's operating from her masculine. She starts to decide that she needs to shift into her feminine, or maybe life just forces her to sink into her feminine. Very often she'll swing the opposite way, into a very wounded feminine. And that's what happens with Andy. Now that could happen in reverse. If you have, like, say a masculine cord man, he's operating a lot from his feminine. And this happens a lot nowadays. When men start to heal their masculine, sometimes they swing to the opposite extreme and they go into a really wounded masculine. They start to get abusive, they start to get controlling. It shifts, and I think if somebody is healthy and they're on this journey, eventually they kind of figure out their natural core energy. As long as you don't get stuck in that extreme, you're probably going to be okay. Might not be that pleasant to be around for a little while, but it's all in the healing journey. So Andy swings from being in this very grounded masculine place, and she kind of hits a breaking point with this job, and she swings into her wounded feminine because she's got this tyrannical king boss who is controlling and really burning her out. In some cases is trying to burn her out. Like, it's really kind of this, they call Miranda a sadist at one point. She kind of has a little bit of sadistic quality to her. And Andy sinks into victimhood mode, which is very much wounded feminine, feeling with the victim. She says so many times in this movie, I didn't have a choice. I didn't have a choice. Like, she's putting herself in that victimhood. I do know a lot of people like to say that Andy's just being whiny, you know, and that she should be appreciative of this job because so many other women want this job. Maybe that's true, maybe it's not, but I think most people would break under these conditions. You know, especially because it's not what she's really truly passionate about. And honestly, the irony in this movie, I think, is interesting because if you were to take Miranda and the way she was acting and the way she was treating Andy, imagine Miranda as the husband and Andy as the wife. Miranda would be considered an abusive husband. Like, she would be. Like, anybody would look at that situation in the way that Miranda was treating Andy and talking to Andy. If Andy was like the doting wife, everybody would be like, oh my God, get out of that, leave him, girl. He's toxic and abusive. But yet when it's a boss and an employee, it's like, well, that's how it works. And then they convince women that it's so much better to be working in an office for a boss than it is for them to be stay-at-home wives and mothers, because they'll get treated better in a work setting, when it's like, okay, but that's the environment that you're accepting in a work setting. Most people would agree that that lifestyle in a marriage would be toxic and abusive. The fact that she's putting all of these completely unrealistic expectations onto Andy, expecting her to achieve things that are not achievable, and then basically belittling her when she doesn't do them properly. She's verbally abusive to her. She calls her fat all the time, which, my God, if I was Anne Hathaway at her size 6 size, I would be happy for the rest of my life. Hello. I wish I could eat bagels every day and her heavy cream soup that she eats and be a size 6. Like, most women would be perfectly happy with that. And the fact that Miranda expects Andy to be on call all the time, like, that's not normal for a job, that you have to be on call 24/7. Anytime you have to just pick up the phone and answer. Like, that kind of work environment is not normal for most people. Like, that's on call all the time, and it's not like she's a doctor going into surgery. She's on call all the time to pick up Miranda's coffee order. I think this movie is a great example of the fact that we convince women that being abused in a marriage is wrong, which it absolutely is, but if they're being abused in the workforce, it's considered liberating. So Andy really does kind of sink into more of her victimhood mode. It's like, I didn't have a choice, as if she really had no control over this. Like, she had control over whether or not she kept the job or she didn't keep the job. She had control over whether she applied for the job at all. You know, Andy had options. She always has her own inner power, but she's giving away her inner power to Miranda because she's convinced that this is the only path to get what she wants. So she's really making herself into the victim in this situation because she doesn't really want to step into her own power. And over the course of the movie, as she starts to step into her own power, she kind of learns to balance more of her grounded masculine with actually having her direction, her passion and purpose, but also figuring out that she is feminine. She does care about people. She cares about more than just the business aspect of things, which is evident towards the end when she actually ends up basically choosing to help out Miranda as opposed to following the proper business path, so to speak, and realizes that Miranda doesn't have that same heart and compassion for people that Andy does. And that's actually when Andy decides to walk away, because she realizes that she has so much more compassion for people and more than just the business world, which is really Andy's connection to her feminine. So in the course of this movie, Andy really does go from being in a very grounded masculine, I would say, but being very blocked from her feminine, to then being in more of a wounded feminine. She kind of swings to the opposite side. Then she really kind of starts to learn to integrate the two within her life. So now, Andy and Nate. This is the controversial relationship that everybody wants to pay attention to. Is Nate a bad guy for not being supportive of her in her career? Andy, in the beginning of the movie, very grounded masculine, very blocked off from her feminine. Nate, I would say, is actually very connected to his feminine energy. He has some connection to his masculine, but he is very much more in his feminine than he is in his masculine. You can see where those two would come together in that situation. So at the beginning of the movie, they're together. Andy has much more passion and purpose. She has much more drive and direction than Nate does. Nate has a job. Nate is a chef. He clearly cares about being a chef. And this is not about, like, because Nate's a cooking, then he's feminine. It's not about that. But Nate's approach to his career is less driven. It's something that he enjoys, but it's not necessarily like this drive to be the best. He approaches cooking, you can tell just by the subtle instances where he brings it up. You can tell he approaches it from a very feminine place. You can cook from a very masculine place, you can cook from a very feminine place. He tends to, like, he talks about, like, finding the perfect texture of a French fry. Like, that kind of sensuality as far as the foods go, tapping into that, very feminine. He's very particular about the types of cheese he uses to just make a regular grilled cheese sandwich, because he's all about the flavors and the sensualities. Like, he's more connected to his feminine energy, and his career suits him in that sense. Andy has much more drive and direction than Nate does. Even notice it that, like, Andy's frustrated at work. She is venting to Nate about how frustrating she is with her job and everything. And Nate is kind of like cooking her a meal and nurturing her, listening to her, being the supportive partner. And, you know, then Andy can't eat because she's like, I'm so stressed out I can't even eat, which is very masculine, to be that stressed out and not be able to eat, thinking that eating is kind of an inconvenience or something like that. Much more masculine, as opposed to Nate, who's like, well, I'm gonna eat it, that's good cheese. Like, he wants to enjoy the food. He wants to fill himself up. She's venting and letting stuff out. He's filling himself up with food. Like, that's literally the masculine and the feminine. The feminine wants to be filled. The masculine wants to be emptied. That's their dynamic, and it seems to work. And so many people want to focus on Nate getting upset that Andy missed his birthday as being the breaking point of their relationship. I don't think that was the breaking point of their relationship. If you really go back and watch the movie, Andy misses Nate's birthday party because she has to do a work thing. She knew she was going to be late, but she ended up missing it. She comes home and she's got a cupcake, she's got a candle. She's more in her masculine. She's trying to give him something to like make up for the fact that she knows he's going to be disappointed. That's one of the moments when Nate kind of gets into his masculine. He gets very shut down. He gets very closed off. He's very like, just going to go to bed. He doesn't want to talk about it. Andy wants to talk about it. Nate doesn't want to talk about it. There's a little bit of a shift there because the feminine in Nate would probably have wanted to talk, have wanted to share emotions, share feelings. So that's an indication that Nate has some masculine in him, isn't really using it quite as much as he normally would because he's in a relationship with Andy. Andy's feeling this guilt and wanting to make it up to him by giving him something, which is very masculine. Giving, masculine is very giving. It's the providing energy. And they're kind of not aligned right there. That's not really the breaking point of their relationship. It's some tension in their relationship, but it's not really the breaking point. Nate does mention at one point in that moment, he's like, you look really pretty. Like, he's even giving Andy a compliment in that moment because he sees her and he acknowledges her beauty. So he's kind of shifting a little bit into his masculine, and that's kind of repelling because Andy's kind of more in her masculine and Nate's feeling a little bit more in his masculine, and that's when they're kind of not coming together. The big shift happens in their breakup. So enter Christian. Christian is a writer, somebody who Andy very much admires, and kind of becomes a bit of a mentor to Andy. Christian is a very masculine character. He is literally penetrating with his gaze. He is so focused. Like when he's on Andy, he has so much focus. He has so much presence. He is such this grounded, wise, masculine character. And if you notice, every time that Andy talks to Christian, she softens. She softens into her feminine. Being in the presence of somebody that masculine softens Andy into her feminine, which is how you know that Andy is probably a feminine cord being. And she likes it. Now, of course, she admires Christian for his work, which is always a good indication. If you as a feminine being admire a masculine, it's only going to make things work more because the masculine loves to be admired for his achievements and things like that, whereas the feminine loves to be admired for her beauty usually. Her beauty, her radiance. It doesn't have to be just physical, but just her radiance in general. But Andy really feels a presence with Christian that she's lacking from Nate. So every interaction that Andy has with Christian, Andy softens so much into her feminine. When Andy panics because she thinks she's going to be fired because she needs to get the Harry Potter manuscripts and she can't find them anywhere, who does she call? She calls Christian, because Christian's the one that she knows can help her. Usually the masculine that the feminine goes to for guidance is usually the masculine partner that she actually feels the most trust in. Every time that they're together, they have this chemistry. And it's interesting because Andy, in the course of this movie, she taps into a little bit of her dark feminine here and there. Not really her dark feminine rage, but she kind of learns to not be the good girl all the time. She kind of taps into her bad girl a little bit when she actually has to step fully into her power. And she doesn't show that side of her to Nate, really. So it's hard to know if Nate really would have been okay with that part of her or not. The fact that he was struggling to tap into his masculine, probably an indication that he wouldn't have been as okay with Andy stepping into that full power that she was tapping into. Christian's turned on by it. Christian is very much turned on by, you know, anytime Andy makes a reference to, well, I'm not as good a girl as I thought I was, or you know, going to the dark side or something like that, and Christian makes references that it's sexy. He's turned on by that because he's not intimidated by her. She can gain power, she can gain strength. He's not intimidated by that because he's so masculine and so grounded in who he is. So that's also an indication that as a feminine being, you want to have a masculine partner that you feel like can out-masculine you, even if you have a connection to your masculine. You want to also be able to be with a partner who is strong enough in his masculine, so if you need to tap into your masculine or you tap into the fullness of your feminine power, he's not going to be intimidated by that because he's so strong in his own masculine. I wish that was more common nowadays. I really do think that more men are stepping into that. I think a lot of men have a long way to go in that aspect, but I do think the more and more men are stepping into that masculine power and that masculine confidence. But as a feminine woman, if you don't feel like you can fully step into your power with your masculine partner, you're probably going to feel like you resent him. You're either going to chase him away because he's not going to be able to handle it, or you're going to suppress yourself because you're not going to feel like you can fully step into your feminine power, and then you're probably going to resent him. And you doesn't have to worry about that with Christian. Honestly, everybody focuses on the whole Miranda Nate thing, and I'm watching this and I'm going, I don't know, Christian seems like he would have been a pretty good catch for her. Their split is odd because they split essentially because Andy realizes that Christian is going to get rid of Miranda and step in and take over Runway, and Andy gets mad at him because he's essentially putting business over personal relationships, and Andy's upset because she wants to protect Miranda because she is valuing more personal relationships, except that Miranda isn't valuing personal relationships. She's doing the same thing as far as business goes. And I think that Andy deciding to leave Christian because he's essentially being masculine. Like, the masculine is going to put business over personal. He is going to put, you know, the right moves in business over personal relationships. That's just how the masculine operates. If Andy wants to sink into her feminine and care about people and connections, she's gonna need a masculine partner that does that. I gotta be honest, I mean, you know, she doesn't have to necessarily be with Christian. However, Christian was much better match for Andy if she was really going to tap into her feminine energy. So back to Nate. So one of the interactions that Christian has with Andy is at Andy's friend's art gallery. They run into each other and they have this really steamy flirtation, and you can really feel the chemistry between the two of them. You can feel his masculine, you can feel her sinking into her feminine. And Andy's also found out too that she is going to go on the Paris trip that Emily was supposed to go on. She ended up essentially having to break Emily's heart because Emily really wanted this Paris trip. It meant more to her, and Andy basically ended up having to go. So Andy's got this guilt that she feels over, you know, hurting Emily, and she's got this guilt because she's in this flirtation with Christian while she has boyfriend in Nate. Andy's friend calls out Andy on this flirtation with Christian, and then Nate walks in, and Nate doesn't know anything about this flirtation. He knows nothing about Christian or anything like that, but he overhears them referencing the Paris trip. You notice in that interaction, and this is the part that everyone forgets. Everyone focuses on the Nate pouting, which I don't really know if Nate was really pouting about the birthday thing. They forget about this actual breakup. If you notice, Nate comes in, he's like, oh, you're going to Paris. I thought Emily was going to Paris. He says it very nonchalant. He's not saying it in a judgmental way. It's just in a very nonchalant, okay, I didn't know this information before. This is new information. What's up with that? Andy starts projecting onto Nate all of her guilt that she's feeling, all of her guilt that she's feeling over going to Paris and kind of bumping out Emily. She's guilty over the fact that she was flirting with Christian, and she's very attracted to Christian, and that she's in a relationship with Nate. She's projecting her judgments about the girls at Runway, the lifestyle that she's now starting to enjoy, making it about Nate judging this lifestyle when Nate's not really judging this lifestyle. Andy's judging it. She's projecting all these things onto Nate. And it's funny how everyone forgets that Andy brings up the birthday party in that argument, and Nate's like, what am I, 5 years old? Like, I don't care. Like, he didn't really care about the birthday that much. You know, she brings up all of these, like, oh, that he's judging her for the fashion world and this kind of stuff. And he's like, I make port wine reductions for a living. Like, I'm not judging anybody. He's not judging her for these things. She's judging herself, and she's putting it on him. So Nate gets really defensive. Any human in that situation probably would get defensive in that situation, because literally you're in a relationship with somebody and that person is now projecting all of the things that they're feeling about themselves onto you. So Nate kind of cracks. He really does. And it probably would have been healthier for Nate to share some of these things earlier on, as opposed to letting this build up. I think this built up because Andy now all of a sudden was projecting this stuff onto him. At the end of the day, I think Nate acknowledges that they don't have as much in common anymore, which may be true because Andy really is prioritizing her career over their relationship. Nate is prioritizing their relationship over career. Ironically, if the roles were reversed, you know, the man was the one who was prioritizing his career and the woman was the one who was prioritizing the relationship, it would be so stereotypical, it wouldn't even be a movie, because it would literally be what the vast majority of people are dealing with. Like, how many women have been in situations with very high-powered men who had to miss an important event because their career had to come first? And as a woman, it's okay for you to feel hurt by that. It's okay for you to feel let down because you wanted to feel like a higher priority to them. But at the end of the day, if you are the feminine being, you're also going to be secretly turned on that you have a man who is so dedicated to his passion and purpose. If we're dealing with two people, like if this relationship was essentially dealing with two people and the person who was focused on their priority and their career and their purpose was the masculine being, truly at their core, and the one in the relationship who was worried about love, connection, the relationship was truly the feminine being at their core, this relationship probably would have worked. The reason why it doesn't is because you've got two people who are not fully acknowledging what their core energy is. Andy is frustrated because she's trying to be masculine and she's doing it for herself. Like, she's putting that on herself. It's not like Nate's just being lazy and she's like, oh, well, I have to be in my masculine now, which is very common in relationships, but that doesn't seem like what's happening here. What's happening is Andy believes she has to be in her masculine. She feels like she needs to be in her masculine and she's denying her feminine. She meets someone like Christian and she realizes like how good that feels to be in her feminine, not consciously at this point, but it feels really good to be in her feminine. So now she's starting to question her relationship with Nate because she doesn't get to feel that way with Nate that she does with Christian. And I think she's still trying to figure out who she wants to be and who she feels better with. Nate is confused because he's thought things were going along fine and now Andy's doing all this shift. Andy's growing and evolving. Their relationship has just kind of hit a breaking point, and that's the moment that they split because Andy essentially has to take a call from Miranda, and I think Nate kind of feels like, okay, it's her or me, and she chooses Miranda. You know, when Andy is dealing with Miranda, she's very much in her wounded feminine. It's I don't have a choice. I'm kind of a slave to this person. I don't have a choice. When she's with Christian, she gets to be in this soft feminine flow. When she's with Nate, she's still in that grounded masculine that she was in earlier on in their relationship, and Andy's really figuring herself out. Now Nate has kind of always been Nate, and he doesn't really appear like he's really looking to change at all. Maybe he needs to change and maybe he doesn't, but at the end of the day, he's going in the same direction and she's confused. That's when they decide to split. And honestly, I don't really see it as him having as much of a problem with her having a career and having a passion and purpose. He just simply wanted to be a part of her life. I think most people, if they saw that relationship dynamic where one partner was literally on call at their job and had a total and complete devotion to their job and was not actually making the relationship a priority at all, most people would probably say the relationship was probably doomed, because you need some kind of connection, when you need some kind of, you know, somebody to actually step in and actually cultivate love in the relationship. So if you have two people who are just never coming together, the relationship is probably going to dissolve. I don't like the idea of calling Nate the bad guy, because it really is more that they just stopped aligning, and Andy was growing and evolving, and their relationship made sense with the energies that they were both in at that time. And as Andy started growing and evolving and changing and shifting, their relationship didn't make as much sense anymore. Now, it's alluded at the end of the movie that they may get back together. Nate gets a job offer in Boston and Andy has a job in New York. It's alluded that they're going to try to work things out. Is it possible that they could work things out? Maybe. If two people are operating outside of their natural core energies and they come together, say a woman who's feminine at her core is in her masculine energy, and a man is masculine at his core but he's operating from his feminine, and they come together that way. When one person starts to shift, it's not doomed. Like, the whole thing isn't doomed. However, you're gonna need both people to be open to the shift and to be able to grow and evolve, because you need those opposite energies in order to have sexual attraction. If one partner does not want to change and shift and evolve, it's really difficult for the relationship to work. So I don't want anybody to think that if they are in that dynamic, because it's very common that people are outside their natural core energies and they come together because of that, and then there's a shift happening. I don't want anybody to think that if you're in that situation that it's hopeless. It's just like, okay, boy, bye, break up, anything. I don't want anybody to think that. It is possible to grow and shift and actually start sinking into your natural core energies. It's not a guarantee though, and I think it takes patience. It takes, I think, effort on both parties to embrace that, to have some humor with the fact that these things are shifting and changing. And it also may mean that the relationship doesn't make sense anymore. None of those things are a guarantee. It's just all things to kind of be aware of. Would Andy and Nate work long term? I don't know. If Andy really does learn to sink into her feminine energy and Nate really does learn to step into his masculine energy, then maybe. If they go back and try to make things the way that they were at the beginning, Andy's probably always going to be lured away, maybe not actually be unfaithful, but she's always going to kind of be tempted by men who are much more in their masculine, because they're going to allow her to sink into her feminine. In the same way that Nate could potentially, we don't know this, but Nate could potentially become attracted to a woman who is very, very much more connected to her feminine, and that might lure him away because it might inspire him to step into his masculine, possibly more than Andy could. Andy could be that woman for him, but you know, we don't know. I mean, that's where they would have to kind of try things out. It could also be that if Andy starts sinking more into her feminine and Nate really wants to stay in his feminine energy and doesn't really want to connect with his masculine as much, maybe he actually is feminine at his core. I don't necessarily think he is, but he might be. He may then start looking for another woman who is more in her masculine, because that might feel more comfortable for him. All those things are possible. Is Nate the bad guy? No. I think that Nate was just, you know, Nate and Andy made sense at a certain point in their life, and the way that they were kind of, Andy was growing and Nate kind of wasn't. They just weren't aligned as much anymore. And so I don't really think that Nate was a bad guy per se. They just kind of stopped making sense at a certain point. I don't think he was as unsupportive of her career as people want to make it sound like. He just wanted to be a part of her life. And I think most people at some point, particularly if you're a woman, understand that concept of meeting a man who puts everything in his life work-wise above his relationship and feeling a little bit left out. Not that you want that person to like not have a career or not have a life outside the relationship, but just that you want to feel more valued in the relationship. And I think if the dynamic was switched and Nate was the female in the relationship and Andy was the male, that we might view this a little bit different. So I think that's something to be mindful of. I don't think Nate is the bad guy. I think their relationship just kind of didn't align as much. So yeah, overall this movie such an example of wounded masculine energy in women, and I really loved seeing Andy's character shift in the different energies as the movie went along. I thought that was really interesting, the way that she went from being a very grounded masculine to being a very wounded feminine to then really being in her soft feminine. I really loved that shift. I mean, Anne Hathaway does these sort of makeover movies so well. So if you had any thoughts on this movie, because I know the Miranda Nate, who's the bad guy kind of thing, was all very polarizing for people. So if you had an opinion about that, let me know. Leave a comment in the comment section below. I'd love to hear from you. If you have any film recommendations or suggestions, let me know. I highly recommend after you watch this video that you rewatch this movie and see if you can pick up on some of the things that I'm talking about. I do little mini film clip breakdowns of individual scenes on my TikTok, and I try to share them here on YouTube in my YouTube shorts. As long as YouTube keeps letting me do that with copyright stuff, I will continue to do that. If you'd like to learn more about tapping into your feminine energy, I have online courses, details in the description box below, along with links to all my social media accounts. If you enjoyed this video and found it helpful, please give it a big thumbs up and be sure you subscribe to my channel. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I hope you join me next time.